Sonya, welcome to Free Your Inner Guru. It's so glad to have you here.
I'm so glad to be here. Thank you, Laura. It's great to see you again.
So let's jump in with talking about a little bit about your story. You've written a book called I'm Not Naked Anymore, or I'm Not Naked and in parentheses anymore. And let's dive into your story and take the conversation from there, because I know we've got a lot of possibilities that we can jump off of.
Well, I wrote the book, the subtitle of which is called Memoirs of a Contemporary Jezebel. Jezebel being my former stripping name. I wrote the book for a number of reasons, most notably because it was time that I got it all out. It starts with, it was post Me Too when I decided to rehash the entire book and publish it finally. And it started with my sexual abuse as a child, which in my opinion, while it's a source of strength for me now, it was a great impediment to my beginning of my life, even right up until probably my early 30s. I always say, when I do these speaking things or when I'm talking to women who share their stories, I said, isn't it funny that we spend the first 25 years of our life getting over the first few as victims, and then, but I wanted it to be a good story. First of all, airing your laundry always feels great, especially when you've been encouraged to keep it quiet. My mother was not particularly supportive of me telling this story. She had her own issues around it and her own inability to take responsibility for it in certain ways. And that was probably very heavy for her, and of course, very difficult for me. So we each had our wars going on. So that was the first part of the story. And what it explains or shows, it doesn't explain, it shows you, because it's really it's prose, it's short stories. It's not, and then these are just little chunks and little great vignettes of my life that show you that as I progressed through the trauma and made spectacular mistakes, that I was able to overcome those and actually use that as a great source of strength. I mean, if I survived all kinds of stuff like that, then damn, I can survive a lot and thrive in the same way with the same amount of strength and energy, which I have. So now as a woman approaching my mid-50s, I have a very different view of it. I have an overview of it, of course. I have a view of it as a mother, having raised a daughter. And I have a view of it as a sister to my women friends and colleagues and people I admire and I'm here for. And I felt a great need to be of service in that way when writing this book. I wanted it to be entertaining, because quite frankly, when you take somebody like me who's got this huge personality and you put on this early abuse and you put it in a spotlight, literally, because I was also a singer and actress from the time I was a child. Everything that I'm doing is in the spotlight. Everything is huge and dramatic and, with a lot of flair and stuff, which makes for fantastic highs, but some incredibly difficult lows too. So all that to say, it was just like this crazy ride, and I'm frankly surprised I'm alive, and I'm very happy to report that I'm thriving. And I wanted it to be a helpful story. They get at the end and they're like, "Oh my gosh, she made it!" Yeah, and yeah, I did make it. A lot of us made it. When we hear that expression, sexual abuse survivor, I get very sometimes fed up with hearing about it. Oh, I survived this. She's a survivor. She's a survivor of, and you just kind of forget, not everybody survives. That's the key. And I'm lucky. I'm smart. I had some great angels, and there was all kinds of reasons why I'm still standing here. But yeah, survivor is a really important word. I mean, we shouldn't forget why that's important to use that word.
Your life seems very, like, one of the things that I talk a lot about is like creative self-expression and self-expression. What do you think it is about you that like, was it always easy for you to be in the spotlight or the public eye? Was it something that you wanted, or is it something that came to you?
There's probably many different forms of performers out there. There's people that have come at it from very, very many different ways. For me, I always felt like I was loud and brassy right from the start. And it was almost like I didn't have much of a choice. I used to say to people, God, I'd love to come back and be happy being like a bricklayer or a librarian or somebody who's very happy just being that regular self. Because performing, it's almost like you have this need to perform and you're loud and brassy and everything. So you perform and then you got to keep it up and then you got to outdo it. And then you got, and it's like this level of, and then you're in it and you're now labeled as that. And you'll never be happy with being more regular again. And yet, sometimes being a regular conventional person would probably have been the best medicine for you at the time. So it's like this weird sort of, and I believe there's born performers and I believe there's made performers. And I think I'm a born performer. There's that whole it factor that people talk about, and some people have that, and it's not always a good thing. There were days where I would have loved to have walked into a room and been ignored. And then there were days where I worked damn hard to make sure I wasn't ignored, So it's like a bit of a, who am I going to be today, right? And you start believing your own press too after a while, especially in the days when I was up and coming as the next big singer, or, I got some great roles and people thought, oh my God, she's going to be a star. And, and then now, from where I am now, having not done that, having not hit that pinnacle, and yet being super happy with who I am, that matters more, of course. But it's a different, we know this as older women, older than 30, that you need that length of time to get the overview, to finally be happy with even your mistakes, right?
Oh, right.
You know what I mean, right?
Oh, 100%. And to look back and see that, oh, there was a path there the whole time. It just was, I just didn't have that perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. And even if people were telling you about that, like, look at it from this side, sometimes you just couldn't see it. And so you were on this bent path all on your own doing. And, and as a brassy kind of loud person, like I said, my mistakes were pretty spectacular. And there's chapters, I don't know if you've read the whole thing, but there's, I was nearly sold in Trinidad as a sex slave. And it's not a casual conversation. Oh, I was nearly sold as a sex slave in Trinidad. Yeah, I really was. It was, and so I put myself in that situation, even though there were red flags, and I ignored them. And here I am. I come from a relatively well-educated family, and and so how do you end up getting mixed up with a bunch of strippers that are really sold as sex slaves, right? So yeah, you ignore these things, and then you see, yeah, you should have gone right, but you went left, and after a while you go, oh well, it was a great ride.
Well, the last time that we spoke, we met about a year and a half ago, and the last time that we spoke, we were talking a lot about your story coming to light just after all of the events that catalyzed the Me Too movement.
Oh, yes.
And you were feeling very optimistic in a way at how women were grabbing their voice, and your book and your story seemed very right for that time. What's, looking back on it now a couple of years later, what's your perspective on the sharing of stories and the difference that it's making in the world?
Well, I go several places when you ask me that. I go to the place of my daughter, who now 18. She was 16 at the time that all this stuff was tumbling down. These empires were crumbling. The Weinstein Empire in particular. And of course, it was a great interest to me because I know people I know one in particular who was a victim of Weinstein's in the acting world. And I know lots of people in our industry. And I was called upon to help rewrite these harassment policies that ACTRA, our actors union, has. And subsequent to that, 16 other unions bounced in and tried to amalgamate them as best they could with their own stuff. Fantastic. That was wonderful. My daughter's views as she crystallized into an adult are also colored by this, where it's almost like a non-conversation for her. You know, like you mentioned harassment, she goes, yeah, whatever, you know, like it's not even on her radar, which I think is not much on her radar, I should say. I think that's a win. That's a great win. You know, she knows when to speak up. She wouldn't have any hesitation. Whereas I had let a lot of abuse happen out of fear of speaking out. So that's a great plus. The roles for women are changing in our industry. On television, we're seeing older women in power. Sadly, not yet on Canadian television as much, but it's coming. But and in terms of conversations with my friends and you and I even, we talked about it a lot, going, oh my God, thank God, you know, now we can talk about these things and people aren't going to look at us like, oh, who cares? Or, you know, it's topic that was top of mind on the news for so long. But I'm finding it's still a limited conversation or misunderstood or simply not interesting enough to have with the men in my life, or the men in business that are in a potential position to rewrite some history here. They don't seem to be as enthusiastic to jump on the bandwagon or continue it, I should say, continue the journey with it. I wish I could give you some concrete examples off the top of my head. Certainly my personal relationship with my partner is an example of that. He's not being necessarily insensitive. He's just completely out of the loop. He has no idea how to support it. He has no idea what might be needed at a certain time from him to me as a woman when I get slighted in that way, or when my daughter gets put down because she's a chick. And, you know, there's still that sort of cluelessness about it. And I'm finding in the outside world, there's not a lot of support for men to ask these questions. How do I support the women in my life? How do I have these hard conversations? Do I even bring them up? You know, so there's a huge gap, I think, still, sadly, between the sexes and how we're discussing it.
Do you feel like it's because either we've become desensitized, or that it's something that it's up to the women to help other women heal?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think they always feel maybe it's a woman's job to support each other because they kind of get each other. And that's fair to a great degree. I mean, I think, I don't know if I said it in the talk that you saw me give, where I said that if we're looking for men to be our best friends, our partners to be our best friends, then we're always going to be disappointed, because as much as we want to try and bridge that gap, there will always be a giant gap there. And I think men are in our lives for very different reasons, not always necessarily to be our best buddy. But so I have that view on the one hand, but on the other hand, it would be nice if they were somehow a little more clued in to what we need at certain times. I'm not even sure how to elicit that. I think they do shy away from these conversations with us because they're afraid of offending. And I think there's probably a little bit of guilt there too. I don't know if you find that in your relationship as well, where your guy's walking around feeling kind of bad when some guy does something stupid because, or, you know, a typical guy thing, right? Like a bad look or an insensitive comment or something.
Yeah, we've had conversations around the difference between blame and responsibility on that, where, you know, like, of course he's not to blame for something that another guy did or previous generations have done, but there's societal responsibility for, you know, men to behave well. and to understand boundaries. And but also I think on the other side of it, there's a societal responsibility for women to have boundaries and to speak up and use their voice. And
Yes.
right, like it's this, there's the yin and yang of it that we all share. I'm not sure if I'm using that metaphor correctly, but there's a time, and I struggle with this, especially when it comes to say sharing my own story. I will go through long periods of like, well, what difference would it make? Or does anybody care? And then that keeps me quiet. And so, but I'm doing that to myself. I have to ultimately take responsibility for that, because I think at the end of the day, I had a really strong conversation with a writers group that I'm a part of. So I wrote up a story that actually had to do with a situation where I'm not quite sure whether to use the term assaulted or abused, but by a young man. And I went quiet on that forever. My best friend and I were out for drinks, and it just so happened to be right at the time, the very day that Christine Blasey Ford was on the stand. So we were out downtown having some wine together, and I was finding that I was very, very triggered that day in a way that I had not expected. Yeah. And then, of course, all of these memories come up, and then I shared that with her. And she looked at me. We've known each other over 25 years, and then she was just like, how did I not know this about you? And I was like, well, what difference would it have made? So I turned around and I wrote, because I was really charged up when I came home, and I didn't want now that day then was not the time for me to be taking it out on another human being, which would have been my husband. Right. Clearly. And so I wrote it up, and I finally just very recently brought it to my writing group, and we had a conversation about what is the point of sharing these stories? And so it's 2 men, 2 women. They just looked at me, and they're like, the sharing is the point. It's not how it's received. It's not what happens. It's not what other people think. Yeah. It's the process of sharing and continually claiming your voice.
Yeah. I felt like 10 tons lighter after writing my book. The process of it, you're right. When you wrote that, probably you went, oh, okay, I can now take this off of here and go and dump it over there. And, it is writing of it, is the processing of it that needs to be done. Watching someone else process it is just as important, like you telling me this story, I'm sitting here nodding, going, yeah, I have exactly those moments in my life too. But you saying, I have a responsibility in society to, that reminds me, so do I. Those moments where we want to get complacent, right? I think that's massively important. Yeah. I think I told you too, for me, this is going to be a really heavy thing to say, but I do believe, I think I told you my mother died about 1.5 years ago, and she died 3 weeks before the book was due to be published. And she was not speaking to me at the time that she died, because my book was going to be published.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah. So I know that my mother, I think she passed away with a very heavy heart about what I was about to reveal. Ironically, in the book, I'm not blaming her. I go into the last chapters called Maiden, Mother, Crone. 3 stages of a woman's life. And I talk about, of course, me and my mother and her mother, and how it gets passed down. And these things that we don't talk about have a life of their own, and they grow into some pretty scary monsters. And, if you don't have the ability to share these things, air them, talk them out, work them out, get validation for them. Even if you have acted improperly as a result of them, because it's all about personal growth, then how are you ever to proceed in life and move forward? And, these things are vital. So I had a not so good relationship with my mother, not because she wasn't a fantastic woman, she was, but because she had an inability to go there at all. That's what our impediment was. If she had had the ability to be freer in her thinking, free of shame, free of guilt for not protecting me, and an accountability for her addiction. She was addicted to Valium when I was growing up. I would have been like, great, okay, I love you anyway. Of course I love my mother. But she was so zipped about it throughout our whole relationship and put a lot of that shame on me and that guilt on me. And I became the scapegoat for a lot of our family's problems because loud and brassy, full of issues, right? You're going to act out. Right or wrong, I'm sure I've so screwed up with my daughter in so many ways. I did not at least screw up that way. I was determined not to have that inability to share and inability to be accountable for my mistakes. Sharing and airing our stuff, I think, is the most vital part of being on this planet. This is what we're here for, is to connect, right?
Yeah, I agree. And I was thinking as I was listening to you, that's a part of, the journey that I went on, say starting, I guess, 11 or 12 years ago, culminating in the Sedona Sweat Lodge. Prior to that, the year and a half prior to that was a discovery, a long process of really claiming my voice, claiming my stories, looking at what my beliefs were. And, nobody had, over the years, I had seen a number of, say, therapists and counselors, because I struggled with, what I can only call depression. I never had a medical diagnosis for it, but I did take antidepressants for a number of years, and I was wanting to get rid of that, starting to get called to, I wouldn't say like a higher purpose, but to a different understanding of what living was going to be like. Yeah. And it was, and to me, that's the value of sort of either the self-help journey or the awakening journey. There's like a lot of big words used around at the end, but to me, that's owning your stuff and taking responsibility for your role in it, but then also from that place, realizing the power of it, right? Like your mom was disempowered by it because she couldn't face it, but it's your journey to face it and then take it to the next level.
Yeah. And I mean, like I said, I might not have gotten it right. I don't know with my daughter. Right. But I had to try. That was my issue. I'm sure she lived out what she had to try here. So there has to be forgiveness for her as well too, right? It's not all on her. And I have friends who have addictions, and they are, my God, I'm not saddled with that. That's not my issue around this lifetime for me. But addictions are some of the most horrific things that people can get saddled with. So they are not even in this life a lot of the time when they're out of it. So I had to take a look at that and fold that in there too. Yeah, it's you're never going to get it all right, but if we can talk about stuff, if we can share it, back to the issues with our guys who don't seem to be turning on the light as much as we'd like with regard to all this Me Too stuff, understanding the sensitivity. It took years for us to get here. years for us to get our issues aired, years for us to have our issues take the form that they have right now, years for us to figure out if we're going to take any kind of responsibility, and like you with your podcast, give back, me with my book and my speaking, give back. All of that stuff didn't just happen overnight. It happened with this burning desire to take our responsibilities to the next level. And I know I'm fucking up everywhere. I know it. I know I am. But I'm okay with that too. That's a big part of it. I'm okay with that. Whereas before, when you are stuck, and I've been stuck, and you're messing up, you're not so quick to admit that. That's a hard thing to give up. So admitting my mistakes and moving forward anyway, and accepting my flaws, and all that stuff, we got to talk about it. Your flaws are okay because I got the same kind of flaws and I get it. And then my girlfriend, you know what I mean? On and on it goes. We're here to connect. That's it.
And I think that humanizes us all.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Instead of being isolated or attempting to deal with life in a silo.
Yeah.
And also, I'm thinking about what it's like to live these days where, you have this wonderful, wonderful wave of the popularity of podcasting, right? Which, and it's surprising in the sense that it's audio first, right? Like this will be released in audio format across all of the different platforms and then the video on YouTube. But by and large, it'll be 99.9% consumed in audio. People want to hear stories and want to, and maybe it's got also to do with just the shit show that is, the political landscape and the social landscape where there's a lot of dehumanizing things going on, and we need the contrast.
Yeah. And on the one hand, that was my daughter had this amazing paper. She graduated from high school and she did this paper on, what did she call it? She said something like dissecting the heroes out there. Like we're in the age of we don't really believe in heroes anymore. We've watched the fall of the church heroes that we had because of all the sexual abuse issues that are now coming to light. Like you said, the politics is just like, I can't even watch it anymore. I cannot turn on the news. I can't. I can't stand it. And what's happening south of us is even scarier. That's like, we're just taking giant steps backwards in humanity, as far as I'm concerned, down there. And up here, we're still sort of apologizing for it and doing nothing. Everywhere you look, teachers are falling and religious leaders are falling and politics are no longer being believed in. Everybody's got a sham show, and no wonder why we're listening to podcasts of wise people and speakers that we never thought would have hit a podium 10 years ago are now so popular, because we need those idols. We need those examples of how to live better lives. We don't have them anymore in the arenas that we were used to.
Yeah, in like the traditional institutions, I think.
Right. Yeah. It's sad, but it's necessary.
I think it's necessary for us to create anything new as a society.
Aren't we? Yeah. Isn't it due? Yeah.
I think so. I was out for dinner yesterday with my mom. It was her 79th birthday. We took her out for dinner, and she was saying, oh gosh, I hope I'm going to remember because it was just there. I've lost it. I'll come back around to if it comes.
She was talking about the old days and how
No, she said, did you ever, because we were talking, she's an avid, voracious consumer of the news, and she's on websites commenting, and she's
really, eh? That's
yeah. she's very engaged. And she said, did you ever think it would come down like that, everything that's happening now would happen? And I was like, no, Mom, I honest to God thought that our generation was going to have a pass. Right?
Well, you did.
100%. I did. I didn't think it consciously, but I didn't ever think that we would, yes, there have been wars, but, my brothers have not gone to war.
Right.
My parents were just born, towards the tail end of World War II. So, so they didn't go to war, and just having to consider the issues that we have to consider today, whether it's as a woman, whether it's considering immigration, the repealing of, or the legalizing abortion, and all these things. I honestly thought that, the blinders were on.
Yeah, yeah. Well, how do you get through life without at least a little bit of wishful thinking, right? Um, you have to. But at the same time, it's interesting you say that, because I've been with my partner for probably 11 years now. And one of the first things he ever said to me when we were having this similar conversation, he said, no, he said, I'm surprised we haven't had a world war yet in our lifetime. And he said, we're due. Statistically speaking, we're due. And I went, oh my God. It was, oh my God. And but from where I sat, I thought the thing that we would go through is the collapse of the environment, which is what we are also going through. So no, I never thought we had a past necessarily, but it's interesting you say that. You're a little younger than me, but yeah, like in a way we have it made, post technology, and we've got all kinds of ways of communicating around the world, and isn't this wonderful? But we still don't have, I think we still don't have the self-respect and the respect for the planet that we need overall. We're still squabbling about skin color and what sex we're born, and there's more than two of them, there's trans and every other thing now, and thank Christ we're talking about it. But at the end of the day, my statement still is, as important as it is, why do we care so much about this? Why do we have to care so much about it? For God's sake, you're on a planet. We're one of several planets out there that has a population. We'd be stupid to think that we're the only populated planet out there. And we're squabbling over skin color and what preference we have in a partner or in our bodies or in our, who cares?
It seems like a systemic distraction.
Yeah, it is. They're tiny little issues to me that blow up into these giant, life-defining causes for certain people, and it still blows my mind. Yeah, maybe I live in a utopia. Can't we all just get along? But you know what? Can't we all just get along? I don't understand why we have this issue still. We should be ready as a species. We're so intelligent in so many ways to be catapulting from this planet and doing many massive and wonderful things, and having the freedom that we have, being spread to the rest of the planet. We know we can feed the whole planet. We can feed the whole planet from one of our richest countries. We could do it tomorrow if we want. We don't need to be stealing each other's oil. We don't need to even have oil anymore. We have technology to have all kinds of stuff that's been quietened now for 100 years because the oil companies wanted to make money. We have ways of heating our houses without that stuff and running cars without that stuff. We have all of this, but we're still thinking so small. And so it's kind of, on the brighter side, I do feel that we are moving closer towards more real conversations. If my life is any reflection and my friends' lives is any reflection, and podcasts and YouTube and the ability to broadcast your thoughts out there are any reflection as to where we are, is that we have finally found a way to communicate what is actually important as a human being. And again, I come back to that word connection. I'm all about that word connection. I just did New Moon Mishes, by the way. I do them every month. And one of the biggest things for me was I would like to connect with more like-minded people. Activity that's happening right now with regard to the news and the environment and all that stuff, because I'm deeply rooted in this stuff to some degree, especially the environmental stuff. As a vegan, you can't escape it because you're constantly having the conversation about why you can't have a hot dog with a friend, right? So, I wanted to have more connections with like-minded people, and we have the ability to do that. And I think that's brilliant.
What do you find is the benefit of consciously engaging with people who are like-minded?
Hope. Get a lot of hopeful feelings out of that. I mean, when you're stuck in an environment where you don't have necessarily the support of people around you for the big causes that you're undertaking. I mean, what you eat is fairly important. And as I mentioned, as a vegan, that whole joke, how do you know there's a vegan in the room? Because they'll tell you. Well, sadly, all of our social interactions revolve around food. And, or most of them, revolve around food. And so I have a pretty big, important platform that I don't eat animal products. And my daughter turned me onto this. And after several months of researching it and several months of figuring out how I can live this way, I now get it. So when I hang around people who are not like-minded, it's very difficult for me to feel hopeful that we're all going to the same place. Whereas if I got a tribe that I get, common stuff with, and we can talk about it and go, oh yeah, don't you hate it when, or didn't you find that, if we're sharing, then it feels like I've got backup, like I'm not just in this alone. But that's just one of the many platforms. The other one is fitness. Like you're a fitness crazed person as well. So talking to couch potatoes wouldn't really be our thing 24/7, even though we'd love to be with people of all walks of life. Finding your tribe is really important, to keep what you feel is hopeful for your life.
Yeah. Connected and energized.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because I guess nobody changes the world by hanging around with people who are just like them, because you have to go out and deal. But you also have to know that you're not alone, because that can lead to a sense of disconnection, and then disconnection leads to feelings of hopelessness and ultimately depression.
Again, of like, well, what's the point? What's the point? Right? We really are who we hang out with. We really are.
Yeah. 100%. You've been on a huge fitness journey recently. I'd love to talk. I'd love for the listeners. She just rolled her eyes, shook her head, grabbed for some water.
Oh God. Yeah, I know.
So you're going into competition coming up very shortly. What possessed you, and and what has that? Your body has been. Our bodies are all of our vehicles, but your body has been a huge part of your journey. Yes. All the way through, from being abused for having your body, from being a stripper, which is showing your body and using your body to make money, to acting, which involves a lot more than just the body, but and now fitness competition. And you've already referenced your age. You said you're approaching or in your mid-50s. Now you've also
I'm 54.
You're 54 and vegan. So as someone who's not embraced the vegan journey, my mind is, okay, fitness competition, protein, vegan. Like, what is going on? Tell us, give us this story, which is post book.
Yeah, it is post. I mean, it's probably going to be worthy of a book in itself, I'll tell you. Yeah, you're right. I express myself through my body. That is, once I kind of got that about myself, I kind of realized, it's not just about vanity. I mean, a lot of it is, absolutely. And vanity is a great motivator, but it's not only that. And yes, it's been wonderful to reclaim so much of myself. And recently, as in the last 2.5 years, I went through some real physical challenges, and I think I have, after several tests and lots of experts weighed in and nobody could figure it out, I think I had leaky gut. And I had massive bouts of vertigo, drop attacks of vomiting and seizures, and a few ambulance rides, and some really weirdo symptoms. I was unable to walk properly sometimes, or unable to fully wake up sometimes, or I had massive intestinal issues all throughout. And I was kind of afraid, actually. I didn't know if I had a terminal disease or not. And it's not like me to kind of worry about that stuff. I actually ignore a lot of my stuff whenever I'm sick. I just kind of press on, and it's that kind of personality. But this just leveled me. And combined with that, I believe these issues were rearing up when my mother was dying, because there was a lot of spiritual stuff to clear there. And she was had a series of strokes, and some pretty major operations from which she was not healing. And again, our relationship was very strained, and I'm one of 3 children. I'm the only girl. So I was, of course, doing the providing thing. I was cooking good food for her, because if you've ever seen what they serve in a hospital, nobody can heal from that. So I was showing up with some great stuff, and she was refusing my help, which was really interesting. So I think those things combined. And then when she passed away and the book came out, and I felt so much lighter, I was happy with the way I conducted myself with my mother at the end. Even though she had a hard time with me, I did not have a hard time with her. I made sure to be there as much as I could, and do what I had to do to feel like I didn't snub her in any way. I didn't get weird. It was not about me at the end. It was about her. And I was happy I was able to do that. But once she was gone, first of all, I was relieved she was no longer in pain. That was really hard to watch. But then I felt a very big lightness come over me. And now I thought, okay, I've told my story now. I can move on with my stuff. I did what I had to do. I don't feel guilt. And I began to completely overhaul my diet in combination with my daughter talking to me about veganism. It all happened within like a few months of each other. I started watching these documentaries on where our food comes from and what we're doing to eat. And I couldn't continue. I couldn't continue what I'd been doing before. So typical me, instead of just saying, oh, I'm going to overhaul my diet and move on with my life. No, I'm going to actually do a bikini fitness competition in a year.
Because it has to be done in public.
It has to be done huge. It has to be done in public. It has to be done with the most amount of ridiculousness and pompous, whatever. And I have fun with it, right? So I thought, okay, I'll do this. But I'll tell you something. I am humbled by this journey, because I thought I would have done this show like a couple months ago. I was not ready. It has taken me this long to get to this level, and I may still not be able to be ready, only because now I'm shooting a show which will interrupt my 24th of August deadline for Burlington, which is where I want to do the show. I may not be able to, because I'll be on set for 16 hours a day. And, I may not be able to continue my gym and my food and all that stuff as I want it to be perfect enough for the show. But regardless, I'm doing a show at the end of the year, before the end of the year. If it kills me, I'm doing this show. And it has taught me so much, not only about nutrition, but how to listen to the most subtle of nuances in my body, to how veganism made me feel lighter already, and paying attention and being diligent to every single thing I put in my mouth is a discipline. I have a huge respect for these athletes. They're not called bikini athletes for nothing. They may look great, and you might look at them going, man, the big tan, the sparkly bikini, who cares? I'll tell you, it takes a lot to get there. It takes a tremendous amount of discipline. That discipline tends to trickle out into the rest of your life too. So my year of doing this has me on point with so many things in my life. And as an actor, watching this body of mine change and having it be on camera, I am now getting auditions and jobs that were never offered to me before. They are roles that are far more powerful, or have bigger voices, or are more interesting and nuanced than they ever were before. So, and it's already hard at my age as an actor to be continuing to work. There's not a lot of work for women. It's coming. There's more of it, but not as much as when I was 30, right? So I'm giving myself a leg up too in this department of my career. But yeah, it's been massively humbling. So I'll see, I'll send you pictures, but I mean, I'll tell you, 24th of August is 3 weeks away, and 8 of those days are going to be on set. So, oh my God, I don't know how I'll do it, but I'll do it.
Yeah. So do you, and this is, I love how you brought this up and you said about the discipline going out, trickling out to the other parts of your life. One of the things that I use in my coaching is environmental design. And that's the core of it. You know, it's like pick an environment and now let's play and, you know, and experiment. And it's inevitable that, you know, we're all interconnected within ourselves. So when you're being disciplined in the body, you shift the mind and vice versa, or the physical environment. So having that go over to your acting environment, how will you set up your acting environment to serve you? Like, do you have any influence on that, or is it something that is out of your control?
It is to a great degree in my control insofar as my conversations with my agents go. I have to make sure that I'm top of their mind all the time. You know, they have a roster of people and they call upon me for my category. It's a smaller category, and but I don't ever let them forget me. And I went to them about, I guess, 11 months ago now, and I said, this is what I'm doing. Like every year I have a big goal, you know. Last year was the book and the speaking stuff. And so I just keep building, you know. So now I'm a speaker that happens to be in really good shape, that's getting good acting roles, you know, like I just keep adding to the roster. But I kept them abreast of the situation by popping in person, not just on the phone, by showing up. And every time I did, I was, you know, not only 10 pounds lighter and tighter and, you know, better suited to cameras, certainly. Then they were happy to see that. As a postmenopausal woman, and that may be actually a book in itself that I'm tempted to write, because I'll tell you something. As a woman who's always been connected to her physicality, menopause was like swimming underwater in the dark. I had no idea what my body was going to do next. I packed on the pounds without even meaning to, and they just wouldn't move. And nothing that I was doing before worked. Nothing that I had done in my life prior to that to get rid of that worked. So I was again humbled by my body telling me I'm in a new phase. You know? So, well, and I loved my curvy body, by the way. I mean, if I hadn't been an actor, I probably might not have been moved so much to change it all that much anyway, initially. Because I kind of liked it. It was bouncier, it was rounder, it was nicer, you know, and I really dug it in so many ways. I've been in different bodies all my life, you know, pregnant, sick, not pregnant, you know, anorexic model in my 20s, and, you know, all that stuff. But nothing prepared me for the being blindsided by menopause, and then coming out of that going, holy shit, like how do I work with this? Like, you know, so everything just kind of culminated into this moment of going, I got to reinvent myself. I was not ready for the amount of work that entailed. I didn't know it was going to be that much, but it was. And I'm almost on the other side now. I'm probably about 38 pounds lighter. I'm certainly smaller and tighter, but all that aside, the looks aside, it's how I feel. And how I feel is strong and lithe. And I'll tell you, I break into a run across the street now, effortlessly. I'm breathing better. I'm sleeping better. I'm standing straighter. There's nothing that aches or hurts anymore. And that is the gold prize to me.
And the competition is just something that inspired the
competition,
aligned action. So do you attribute these changes to like the lack of pain, the energy? Do you attribute it to the veganism, or do you attribute it to the I'm assuming heavy lifting? I've seen photos on Facebook, so I know you're lifting heavy. what do you attribute this lightness and ease, or is it the combination of both?
I think it's a combination of both. I got hit by a car 4.5, 5 years ago, and I had a lot of issues from that too. So again, it was like, great, just hitting menopause and then I get crunched by a car. So I was immobile for quite a while, but I think it's a combination. I initially, when I first went vegan all the way, I just dropped pounds instantly, and felt better. I think and I was a huge meat eater, by the way. I mean, I should tell you, it wasn't just like, oh, I was sort of a vegetarian. And no, I mean, I was like, get the grill on. And if that thing is bleeding on my plate, I'm eating it, right? I grew up, in the country and in Quebec, and we had our own little fun farm, mind you, but I've slaughtered stuff myself. I've killed chickens and I've done that stuff. So that was a big step for me. But once I eliminated meat and saturated fats, it just seemed my body instantly responded. You attribute anything to A type blood. They say that that's the newest kind of blood and it does well on a vegetarian or a vegan diet. Probably. O types are a little bit more meat eaters, they say. I don't know. I'm not a scientist, but that seems to make sense to me somehow. But the heavy lifting took a while to become heavy. I had lifted weights many years, but never to this degree. So, and I can't say that I recover from that easily. It's not I wake up the next day feeling it. But somehow as I've built muscle, which is an extremely hard thing to do, I've discovered, and lost fat, which is easier to do, I have reinvented the composition of my body. So everything seems to be working better. My digestion is on point. My breathing is so much better. My allergies were virtually non-existent. Having broken into hives this week, I don't know what happened, but I don't think it's an allergic reaction so much as I used a sunscreen. That may have been it, but anyway, we'll find out. But this is an anomaly. Otherwise, I've not had any issues at all. So combination for sure. Yeah.
The more it's interesting as I'm listening and I'm reflecting back over our entire conversation, it really is, it is the story, and I think continues to be the story of inhabiting your body, right? Like, yeah. It's,
you know what, a lot of your people listening to this who have had early childhood sexual abuse will relate to this. When I say that I did not have a feeling of owning my body until my mid-20s. I did not feel I had a right to speak up for it, or I was numb in it many years. And yeah, this is now, a quarter of a century later, I'm sitting in it from a very different position. I'm very happy I have every cell of it and I feel them all. Yeah.
Well, and you know what? It's amazing because if you're able to look at the video, you're glowing right now as you're saying that. Absolutely. But it also, to me, what it does is it proves our earlier point. We were saying or it answers our earlier question. We're saying, what's the point? This is the point, right? The point is to own it. and bring it forward. So sharing the story, writing the book, experimenting and playing in the body and reconnecting to ultimately, a huge part of your true self. This is what an empowered, life looks like, or an empowering journey looks like.
Yeah. That great expression, right? We are spiritual beings having a human experience.
Yes, very much.
Yeah. I think that's probably my mantra for this go around.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah.
And enjoying the physical. Well, Sonya, it's been a pleasure. I feel like we could talk for hours and hours and hours.
It's been fantastic. Thanks.
Yeah. For the listeners, the book, I'm Not Naked Anymore, Memoirs of a Contemporary Jezebel, I'll leave links in the show notes, as well as a link back to Sonya's website. And Sonya, as much as this is going to be out there for a very long time, what have you got going on if people want to go and watch any of the shows that you've been in, or what's coming up on the horizon that we can look forward to that you're able to share?
Well, I am speaking this September at a wonderful retreat put on by an incredible woman, Lorianne McLeod. It will be in and around Milton, Ontario. And it's typical of the kind of talks that I love to give. I'll be talking about forgiveness, and of myself and of other people and situations in my life, as well as the playfulness of the body for sure will come into it, because it's a fitness retreat. And we've got to have fun with this, right? But also, any of my acting is on my IMDb page. I'm like any other actor. You can find me there. And as for the book, I'm going to be coming out with a second edition of it, because there's an add-on to it. A lot of people have asked me, and I gave it the cat's out of the bag for this interview, what happened to my mother, because I end with her going into surgery.
Oh.
But the ensuing relationship I have with my mother now post-death is a different one, and it's a much better one. And I'm able to be much more objective about our relationship, hers and mine. So I think that's going to be key in my talks coming up and my conversations with people, because that's everything to us. Is, that's what we came from. That's the body I came from. And again, we're talking living our journey fully and completely in this body. She gave me this body, and I'm a lot like her, which is a fantastic thing. I'm able to love her so much more deeply now than I was able to before. So that's a big part of what's coming up for me. And as my daughter leaves, and I'm sure I'll be hearing about all the mistakes I made with her. So. And then again, I'll be accountable for those and how to make those better and how to keep enriching it and deepening my connection with her, because I don't want to have the same story of having an estranged daughter. I want to have something different. So I'm going to have to create that. And sometimes it's going to have to be looking at my stuff a lot more closely. But I'm game. So, and as for acting, that continues. I'll be continuing to act. I do believe I'm also singing in a show called The Patsy Cline Show. It's happening at the Lula Lounge on September 5th of this year, 2019. Happens every year, where some of the best collections of incredible musicians in Canada get together under one night, under one place, and do Patsy Cline tunes only. It is probably one of the best shows Toronto puts on all year.
Oh, so that's exciting.
Thing at that, yeah.
Well, thank you very much for coming on, sharing your story, and there's a couple of dates I'll be marking on my calendar. So
wonderful. Thank you, Laura, so much.
My pleasure.
Okay.